Welcome to The Nudge, where small shifts create powerful transformation. I'm Andrea McCabe, heart-centered educator and architect of awakening. And today's topic is why your patterns feel so true and the beliefs underneath them that quietly shape your life. Let me start with something that might feel a little uncomfortable to hear. Some of the patterns you're trying to change don't feel true because they are true. They feel true because they were never questioned. Not because you avoided questioning them, but because at the time they were formed, you couldn't. So what you're living is not just a pattern, it's a belief you learn to trust. Last episode, we explored why patterns feel so automatic, how your system runs what it already knows, and how emotions can happen before you even think. And if you listened to that and thought, well, that makes sense, but what is actually underneath that? This is the layer that we're going to unpack. Because underneath that pattern, there is something quieter, but far more powerful, a belief. And the clearest way to understand that is to see how it forms. For a very long time, I had a belief that my parents didn't love me. Not occasionally, not in certain moments. Just it was true, or at least that's how I felt. Growing up, there wasn't a lot of emotional expression in my home. No one said I love you. There wasn't physical affection. Both of my parents were emotionally shut down in their own ways. As a child, I was observant. I noticed how my parents spoke about my siblings, sometimes critically, sometimes negatively, and I made a connection. If they speak about them that way in front of me, they must speak about me that way in front of them. No one told me that. I concluded it. And from there, something deeper formed. They didn't love me. And this is where something important is happening. There's something I invite you to consider. Beliefs don't actually come from facts. They come from interpretation. As children, we're constantly trying to understand, what does this mean about me? And whatever answer we land on becomes the truth. It's what we carry forward. Not because it's accurate, but because it made sense in the moment we needed it to. And when we slow that moment down, we can actually see how it forms. In the work I do, I see it through four simple lenses. What we call the 4 E's: an event, an emotion, an environment, or an experience. Something happened that was felt. It occurred in a particular context, and meaning was created. And the meaning becomes the belief. Now, while your story is different than mine, the beliefs that come out of these moments are often strikingly similar. Most people aren't walking around with hundreds of beliefs. They're carrying a handful that show up in different ways. Things like, I'm not enough. I'm too much. I'm not important. I'm not safe. I don't belong. Or have to earn love. And once a belief like that forms, it doesn't sit quietly in the background. It starts shaping how you see yourself, how you show up, and what you expect from the world. And this is where it becomes visible, because even if you don't hear those beliefs directly, you'll see them in your patterns. If you believed you weren't enough, you might overwork, overgive, overthink. If you believed you were too much, you might shrink, hold back, or second-guess yourself. If you believed you weren't safe, you might try to control everything, stay hyper-aware, or struggle to relax. And if you believed you didn't belong, you might feel like an outsider, even in a room full of people. This is often the time where people pause and think and go, oh, that's me. And when you start to do that, you also begin to see the cost. Because the beliefs don't just affect how you feel. They shape what you allow, what you expect, and what you stand for. They influence your relationships, your decisions, your opportunities. And often you don't realize it's happening because it doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like reality. And the reason it feels like reality is because your system has been reinforcing it. Every time that happens, it gets filtered through that belief. Anything that matches it stands out. Anything that doesn't fades into the background. So over time, you're not getting the full picture. You're seeing a version of reality that confirms what you already believe. And this is where something begins to open, because this is what I'd invite you to consider. If a belief was formed, it can also be revisited, not by forcing you to think differently, not by pretending it isn't there, but by becoming aware of it. Because the moment you see a belief as something you learned instead of something you are, you create space. And in that space, something becomes possible. And this is where we start to work with it. Not perfectly, not all at once, but intentionally. Because when something is felt like part of who you are, you don't force it to change. You begin by creating space around it. I'd like to offer you my 5 keys to begin unraveling this. Key number 1, name the belief. Specifically, a belief cannot shift if it stays vague. I feel off, or I feel triggered, or I don't feel good enough. Those are experiences. The belief is underneath that. I'm not enough. I'm too much. It's not safe to be seen. And the moment you can define it clearly, you move from being inside it to being able to see it from the outside. Key number 2, separate the belief from who you are. Right now, it feels like truth. But there is something I invite you to consider. A belief is something you learned, not something you are. Even the smallest shift, from I am not enough to I learned to believe I'm not enough, creates space. And that space matters, because you can't change something that feels like your identity, but you can work with something you recognize you learned. Key number 3, understand how it was formed. This belief came from somewhere, and when you look at the 4 E's, an event, an emotion, an environment, and an experience, you begin to see something important. This didn't come out of nowhere. It formed in a moment that made sense. And when you understand that, something softens. Because instead of asking, what's wrong with me, you begin to see, this made sense at the time. Key number 4, gently question what feels true. Not aggressively, not forcing a new belief on top, but by understanding something important. Your brain is always looking for truth, not proof of what is true, but proof of what it already believes. So when a belief is in place, your system scans for evidence that confirms it, and it finds it again and again. So instead of asking, is this true, we open it differently. Is this always true? Where might this be true? What evidence exists that doesn't fully support this belief? At first, your brain will try to resist because it's not used to thinking in that direction. But the moment you can offer it even a small piece of evidence, something shifts. Because now you're not just reinforcing the old story. You're beginning to expand it. You don't have to prove the belief wrong. You have to show your system it's not the only possibility. Key number 5, create new experiences. And from there, we begin to create new experiences. Because if a belief is formed through an event, an emotion, an environment, or an experience, it then can begin to shift the same way through new moments. Moments where something different happens, something different is felt. You respond differently, and new meaning begins to form. Not all at once, but enough to begin opening another possibility. And this brings me back to where we started, because today I can tell you something different. My parents did love me in the ways they knew how, and with the capacity they had. The belief I formed shaped how I experienced that love. And this is what we begin to work with. Not just what happened, but what it came to mean. So this week, I want you to notice something different. The next time you have a reaction, ask yourself, what would I have to believe for this to make sense? And just listen. Because that answer isn't random, it learned. Until next time, stay curious about what's true. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Please like and subscribe. It does help this channel grow. And most importantly, honor that nudge because shift happens.